you were telling me the other day, Vic, about your background and where you were born in Italy, not in Italy. Why don't you take it away?
I was born in 1941 during the war, and not many people realise that the northern part of Africa, which is Libya and Ethiopia, before the war was of Italian. It was an Italian dominion, so technically my parents lived there. After the war, we moved back to Italy because obviously the northern part of Italy was devastated, and so was Italy for that matter. So my father was a watchmaker and jeweller. He didn't have much business in those days. There was no money and everything was devastated. So we moved to Australia in 1948. Well, I was only a kid. Dad came out in 48. We came back in 1951. So I was born in, technically under the Italian flag, but it wasn't Italy at all. It was Libya. And Tripoli in those days, I went back in '64 and it was a gorgeous town. Unfortunately, when it went back to the Arabs and Gaddafi, it was totally devastated. It's nothing like it used to be. Right, what else do you want me to say?
All right. So we were also talking about your early education in Australia and which schools you went to. You all went to Melbourne. Your father must have set up a business, and you went to elementary school in somewhere in Victoria, right?
Yep. Dad opened up his own shop in '54 in a suburb of Melbourne called Carlton, which is technically an Italian area. And slowly but surely, he grew to become a fairly well-known jeweller, and opened up a second shop in Peel Street, North Melbourne, near the Victoria Market. And by that time I was 14, 15 years old, after having been schooled in primary school in St George's, Carlton. I went to St Joseph's, North Melbourne, the college. And there, I walked in and there was a big, huge structure with a wire all over it. It looked like a bird cage, and there was kids playing what they called handball. And I got on the court and I tried to swing at it and missed it by a mile. And I'm not exactly a quitter. I'd like to get back in there, and sure enough, once I started schooling, within 12 months, I was one of the best players in the school. And then it just grew from there. I went, played junior handball, and I made the Victorian state team at 17. And at 18, I was an Australian champion, thanks to my good old friend Jack Hughes, who virtually coached, not so much coached me, but he saw the potential in me and asked me to play him and play with him, and we won the Australian doubles title in 1960 when I was 18.
Well, who is this fellow? What was he? A teacher? Or?
Jack Hughes was from what I remember of him, he was an ex-Christian brother, and left the order and kept playing handball. And he was 40 years old when he played with me. So he did great serving, and I did the hard work at the back, and we were a great team. And he was my first partner in crime to win an Australian title. Jack unfortunately died. He's one of three players in Australia that won an Australian title with me that have since died. The next one that died was a gentleman called Warren Pipcorn. He was a good friend and a player, and died of motor neuron syndrome years ago. And then the next guy that died was a very good friend of mine, and I missed him big time, a fellow called Peter Urita. So three of my partners who won Australian titles with me are now dead. In three-wall, I've got two others, namely Jeff Walsh and Fred Italiano, who are still good friends of mine that we won Australian titles together. After the three-wall career, if you can call it, I became very, very busy and took over the business of the being a jeweler, and opened up shops, and I worked very, very hard, and therefore handball 3-wall, because it can only be played during the day, I wasn't able to train, so handball 3-wall became a secondary factor in my life. But I was very fortunate that a bunch of guys from Tucson, Arizona, namely Carl Porter, Neil Manning and Doug Clark, had the bright idea of coming out to Australia and build handball racquetball courts and a big centre fairly close to where I live. And I looked at a 4-wall court, and I started playing 4-wall after that, and had fairly good success. So my 3-wall game, my 3-wall career finished, but my 4-wall took over big time.
Wait, so I want to back up and say, this is, I think on Wikipedia it calls it Australia-American Irish handball, not like the European handball where you hit the ball with your fists
And
hands, and maybe you want to briefly describe what handball is.
Handball was bought out from Ireland with the Christian Brothers order, and wherever they had colleges, they built handball courts. The original handball courts that came from Ireland was 60 by 30, 60 foot long, 30 feet wide, with a 30-foot front wall, 3-wall. That game virtually has petered out. It's still played a little bit, but the courts were built in the inner suburbs of Melbourne, and the land became too expensive, and the colleges needed the land, so that the courts got ripped off. There's no courts virtually in Melbourne to speak of.
I wondered why that happened. So it's basically an economic, because
Absolutely.
they're too big,
Well,
like relative to squash court or...
Well, the courts were built almost within 3 or 4 kilometres of the centre of the city, so the land became very expensive. The colleges either moved out further, or they needed more room for the classes, because let's face it, Melbourne is now 4.5 million people. And in those days, you're talking 1.5, 2 million. So it's grown enormously. There's a lot more kids going to school, so therefore they needed more space for school rooms, school classes, etc. So the handball courts have gone. And luckily, as I said, the Tucson guys came along and built 4-wall courts, and it didn't affect my work because I worked during the day and I played handball at night. So I became fairly good at 4-wall handball because I had some experience of playing with the back wall in 1970 when I went to Ireland for the first world handball title I attended, and I became pretty good at it. And with the help of my good friend Joe Santilli, who was virtually the only player I could train with, I won my first underage world title in '86 in Kelowna in Canada, and then subsequently won 9 world handball titles plus three world titles in Las Vegas, which we both enjoy and go and play 3-wall outside, because I was virtually born on a 3-wall court, and 3-wall is my game. So I won 12 in a row, and coupled with my 43 Australian Open titles, I'm pretty happy.
Well, I was asking you before, so you went to one of the Christian Brothers schools in Melbourne, and then you won like a high school title, and then you played in the adult team pretty quick, or while you were in high school you were in the adult?
No, because I started playing handball when I was 15, and I didn't see a handball court till I went to college at that age. I wasn't good enough to play in the school events or underage school events, and virtually took me a year or so to become good enough to play pennant handball. So at 17, a year or so, 18 months later, I made the Victorian state team and represented Victoria. And then the following year, as I say, I won my first Australian title. I played handball every day. My father was almost, in tears. I was supposed to. I worked with him, became a watchmaker jeweler with him, and every chance I got the hell out of there to play handball.
So that's a little bit. We were talking also earlier about in America where I live and whatnot. Kids often, when they finish high school or university, they start. What do? They quit playing competitive sports, and whereas you ramped it up, and is that Australian to play intensely through your 20s? It's kind of unusual.
Well, it's probably, it all stems from the fact that I love the game. I mean, I played 3-wall and enjoyed it and did fairly well. As I say, I won quite a few Australian 3-wall open titles, as well as numerous underage groups as well. But I was, as I said, I was lucky enough to have international experience by going to Ireland and watching them play their 60 by 30 and 40 by 20 games. Met some beautiful guys, including Pat Kirby and Joey Mara, and met heaps of good other players from all sorts of places in Canada and America. And then, as I said, I was lucky enough that they built handball courts here in Melbourne, handball racquetball courts, and we actually held the world handball title here in 1988. It was our bicentenary, and we got some money from the government, and the government gave us the money so we could hold the world handball title.
4-wall or 3-wall?
4-wall, totally 4-wall. We had a 3-wall competition as well, but the Americans and the other countries couldn't hold the candle to us. We were just, that's our game. We bashed the hell out of the ball, and they can't play the 60 by 33 wall. But the 4-wall game was the game, and we had, as I said, we had the world title. Unfortunately, it's never going to happen again because the game did not take off. Racquetball and handball just petered out, and the 10 beautiful courts we had has now been reduced to 2 courts, and that's all there is in the whole of the country. You want to play 4-wall in Australia, you have to come to Melbourne because we've got 2 courts, and that's it, nothing else. All the other states, all the courts are now gone, both 4-wall and 3-wall. The 3-wall game, there's only a couple of courts in South Australia. The 1-wall court is the one that's taking over. There's 1-wall courts in all states, and that seems to be the game that's taking over from 4-wall and 3-wall now. Yes, I do play 1-wall occasionally. I don't enjoy it as much because it's very basic. The ball is too light, and I've honed my skills on a 4-wall court playing with left hand, open hand, fish shot. It's a lot more shot making in 4-wall, and 1-wall doesn't have the same intensity for me that 4-wall does. But I play it, and it looks like the 1-wall game is the one that's going to take over in the long run, because the countries all over the world have taken it over. And I was shocked to see that via Facebook, happened to be in San Remo in northern Italy, and I got guys coming over to take me to a handball courts in Liguria, which is not far from San Remo, to play handball, and they play 1-wall handball. I was shocked. I loved playing with them. Made some great friends there. I keep in touch with them via Facebook. That's how they found out that I was a world handball champion, and I could play 1-wall, and they came and got me, and they said, look, it'll be an honour to be on the court with a world champion, and I couldn't refuse after that.
Yeah.
So I had a ball with them. I had a great time. Yeah, 1-wall is going to be the game.
So Vic, I wanted to tell everyone who's listening that I saw you when I was a child in CBC in Adelaide in 1970. You won the Australian title from our hometown hero, Lou Ravisi. And what really shocked us was you had this unique ability to cut the ball both ways off the ground. Somehow you hit the ball, it didn't go too far off the wall, and then it did a leg break or an off break for our Australian audience off the ground. And I think you told me some story about how somebody taught you that trick.
Well,
is this a major part of your game, or is that just a childhood memory of mine?
No, what happened was when I was still at school, two or three of the Christian brothers played handball after school, of course, and I played with them. One of the brothers was a big strapping guy, and he used to play open-handed. And I saw him spin the ball off the floor, and I thought, how's he doing it? He didn't know how he was doing it, but I was, pretty astute and watched him, and I realised that he was cutting across the ball and spinning it one way. Then I suddenly realised that over a while, if I topped the ball, it would spin the other way. So I thought I invented spinning the ball till I go to America and realised that these guys have been hopping the ball, as they say, for years. They call it hopping. But I honestly, the spinning serve, especially in three wall, in doubles especially, became a very big weapon of mine. And to this day, I rely on that spin serve big time. Because of the way I swing, especially in America, they don't know what the heck I'm doing, and the ball goes spinning both ways, and they don't see how I do it. And I win a lot of games with that spin serve. Yes, it's a very big part of my game.
But if you cut under the ball or cut over the ball, that's a very different action. You think that would be easy to detect?
No, it's exactly the same swing. The difference is at the moment of impact, I slice the ball, and at the moment of impact, I come over the ball, and it becomes like a top spin in tennis. It's exactly, you think of a guy hitting a top spin in tennis, well, that's the ball that breaks to the right. That's the reverse. And if I get if I get to the ball and don't go over it and slice across it, it becomes a natural, as the Americans call it.
That's like an off break.
Yes.
To the receiver.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's coming into and cutting back into their body, and so they get. We kids saw Lou Ravisi, and he was trying to hit the ball, and sometimes it would be coming into him, and he'd be like strangled, and sometimes it'd be going away from him, and he'd be off balance.
Yeah, I had great pleasure in attacking. They'd stand in the middle of the court waiting for the reserve, and I would hit the ball towards them, short enough that they can't move in to take it on the full or fly, as the Americans call it. And then I'd have great pleasure watching the ball spin away from their body, eat away, and they stood there dumbfounded. I made people look silly, very silly, with that serve.
So in four wall, it'd be almost impossible to take on the full on serve, right? Unless the guy intentionally served the ball high.
The chances of you in four wall taking my serve on the fly or the full would be almost impossible, because I hit it.
You hit it low.
So very low and hard, and you can't get up there in time to take it on the full.
So I know you haven't prepared this, but I'm wondering. I read some stories about the golden era of handball in America in the 60s, when it was like on Sports Illustrated, and there's this guy called Paul Harbour who was notorious, and I'm wondering...
Jimmy Jacobs is the guy.
Did you meet any of these people?
No.
Did you play against them? Or?
No, I was the only person that I played against who people underestimate was a fellow called Pat Kirby. Pat Kirby I met in 1970 in the world titles in Ireland, and I thought I was a pretty good player till I met Pat Kirby and Joey Maher, and I suddenly realised I had to step up just a little bit higher.
This is four wall, we're talking four wall, right?
Any wall, that guy here, Pat Kirby had won many Australian, Irish titles in the 60 by 30, 60 by 34 wall. Went to America and took up 40 by 20. So he was a champion at 60 by 30 as well as 40 by 20. He was a great player. He actually trained with Jimmy Jacobs weekly, and he told me that he matched him. Now, Jimmy Jacobs, from what I gathered, he was the best player of his era. And a lot of people ask me, well, of all the people you've seen play, who was your best? But obviously you can't compare the current modern player with the old time players. You say Jimmy Jacobs, without doubt, was the best player of his era. And then came along Natty Alvarado, who obviously was the kingpin in those days, and then Paul Brady. and now Brady is virtually finished his run, and now this Killian Carroll is going to be the one. And in between, there's great players like David Chapman, who was a very good friend of mine. He came out here and we won an Australian title together. David was a fantastic player, but you virtually can't compare those players. And you say, who's the best? You can't compare them because 40, 50 years ago, those players wouldn't live with the current players. They're bigger, they've grown bigger, they're fast, stronger, they train better, they train harder, they've got better supplements. Without doubt, the current players would beat the 40, 50 years ago, without any doubt in my mind.
Well, when you came out from Australia, I guess in '70 you said, and you were overmatched, or I think you told me you won one game off the
Pat Kirby, yeah.
So what was it, why was he, was the European or Northern Hemisphere game better, or there just more people playing, and what was the nature of him being better than you? Did you need to do weightlifting or better diet? Or
no, Pat was a gifted player. I mean, Pat was a champion, Irish champion, before he went to America, and I think he left Ireland in the mid '60s, late '60s, to go to America. But he was already an Irish Open champion then, and so I remember. He came from County Clare, and the handball court was virtually next door to where he lived. So he played handball just as much as me, and he had two brothers that played handball as well. So he had plenty of players to play with. So he became a champion before he went to America. And then went to America and lived in New York, and he had a myriad of players to play with. So you can only get as good as your opponents. I mean, you've got good players to play with you, they drag you along, and you become a better player. Now, Pat, without doubt, although I took a game off him because I went bananas and I played great in the first game, and it took so much out of me that I just couldn't keep going. But without doubt, Pat at the time was a better player than me. But bears it may, he became a good friend of mine, and in 1994, I went to Ireland in County Clare, in his hometown, and I beat him in the 50s. And the hometown nearly lynched me. But luckily, Pat was a friend of mine, and he lifted my hand and said, no, this is a great champ, and he beat me fair and square.
Is he still with us?
Yeah, Pat's living in Tucson, Arizona these days. As I say, I occasionally give him a call, and I have to give him a call soon because it's been a while now. He's a great friend of mine.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
The other thing I can say is that I've been to every world since 1970, and I've enjoyed the worlds immensely. I've made some great friends, had good success, but I've had my ups and downs as well. I've had a hip replacement, a shoulder replacement, and many injuries in my knees. And I've got a problem with the right knee, which needs replacing as well. But although the specialist tells me that I have to have a knee replacement, there's a world handball title next year in America in August, and I'm doing my darnest to get there.
All right.
I have threats. I've had people threatening me that if I don't go, they'll come and get me, probably put a noose around my neck to do it. So I've got to go. I've rested for the last 12, 18 months. I didn't play in the Australian titles last August, just to give myself a rest. I'm playing golf of all the damn things. Stupid old man's game.
You're telling me though the right hand is the same thing in golf as handball, so
it's basically the same swing, for God's sake. People say, oh, you could be a good golfer. But I said, look, I don't want to have a lesson and try and improve my game, because I swing at a golf ball like I do with a handball. It's basically the same thing. You keep your left hand straight and you use your right hand to whack it. I can hit the ball as good as anybody with the driver and even a second shot. What brings me undone is my chipping and putting, because I don't get out there and chip and putt because it drives me nuts to do it. I mean, it's boring. I don't want to do that. So I can't wait for me to get back on a handball court and enjoy it.
Now, two things that you've talked to me about before we wrap it up. One is you were telling me how you have the demands of family and business, which
Right.
I guess you went into retirement for a while. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. And the other thing I want to ask you is, are there any other colourful characters that you want to mention on this recording now? So before we wrap it up, those two things.
Three wall was a fantastic stepping stone to handball for the 40 by 20 world titles. But three wall virtually stopped for me in 1973 when I had two children and I had to feed them, and I opened up my own shops and I worked 7 days a week. I couldn't train because handball in those days was played outdoor with no lights. So I couldn't train during the day because I was working. So virtually three wall stopped for me in 73, 74. I played spasmodically till the 40 by 20 indoor game came along. So I was, as I said, I find myself very fortunate that I was able to keep playing handball, which I love, playing 40 by 20 indoor. And I thank my lucky stars that the guys in Tucson decided to put those courts up. Unfortunately, it didn't work. They went back to the States and they had intentions of building more and more courts, but unfortunately it didn't happen. So it's very, very heartbreaking to see that the 10 beautiful courts we had have been ripped out, and then now the gym junkies have taken over pushing weights, which drives me nuts.
Didn't you say also that, I guess, or is it racquetball or squash, kind of a more ascended, maybe they're, how do I say that, easier to play or less gritty sports than handball, which has a reputation of a tough guy sport, right?
Well, because of the courts were there, and there were courts in New South Wales and South Australia at the time, I played racquetball. Let's face it, racquetball is on a handball court, for God's sake. So therefore, you've got a racket in your hand. So I became pretty good at racquetball on the full-size court. And there were Australian titles held in those days. Of course, I had my share of wins. But the courts in New South Wales and South Australia got ripped down. So therefore, that petered out. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't many players playing 40 by 20 here. As I said, the only person I had to train with was Joe Santilli. Now, to supplement my fitness, I hated gym work and pushing weights and so forth. So they played racquetball on a squash court with a softball with a racquetball racket, and they played squash rules, and they have great rallies. So I played that for many, many years as a state number one player, and that kept me fit for handball. So racquetball, I got a big debt to pay for racquetball on a squash court. It's a great game, fantastic workout. It's still been played quite a bit down here, and I still play it occasionally just to give myself a bit of a workout. But it doesn't hurt as much as handball, but you get a lot of workout. The ball bounces, and I played a lot of great squash, but squash is too hard on your body. You're really stretching down below, and a couple of inches from the ground, it's just far too hard. Racquetball's great on a squash court. Will not take the place of handball though, isn't it? Handball is still the game.
So you must have come out of retirement when you got getting your businesses going, like in the 70s or 80s. Yep. What did you say? What your business was earlier on? I can't remember.
Well, my father was a watchmaker, and he had a couple of shops, and he wanted me to hang around for him to retire and then take over. And I said to him, "Mate, you'll live to be 100. There's no way known." So in 1973, I left and opened up my own shops. And I ended up having 4 shops by the time I was finished, and I worked pretty hard. So therefore, handball wasn't in the equation in those days. But finally, I retired and became a land developer 10 years ago, and I did very well with that. Luckily, now my wife is now retired. Now I want to travel the world and play handball all over the world. I've enjoyed playing handball all over the world, Ireland, I had a beautiful game in Barcelona and Valencia. I played handball in Japan, Canada, Ireland, America. I've played it all over the world, and in Italy as well. Just recently, as I said, I go over there. So people know me, so they come and grab me to play handball. So handball has been a real door opening for me for lots of things.
Well, are there any? Do you want to tell us about any of the famous or colourful characters that you've played with over the past?
Oh yeah, well, that Jack Hughes guy, he was definitely the catalyst of me studying my handball game. He saw the potential of my potential and helped me win an Australian title and put me on the road to being a good player. He was a fantastic ambassador of the game. He kept the game going. After that, I went to play at Essendon, and Jeff Walsh was my nemesis, and we became great great opponents. But he's still a good friend of mine. Strangely enough, all the guys that I tried to beat and they tried to beat me have now become some of my best friends.
Well, I noticed that when I saw you win the championship last year in Fridley, is on the court. It looked like you were all ready to rip each other's throat out, and playing the umpire and intimidating each other. And then I was shocked when you showed up for dinner afterwards, slapping backs with Ed Grossenbacher, the guy you just shimmied around the court and beat in a close game in the final.
It's a funny phenomenon that the guys that you have huge huge fights to try and win titles become your friends after. Ed's a perfect example. I beat him in the very first world title I won in 1986. I beat him, and I beat him again in Ireland in 2012. And then I happened to play him in the final, as you say, in Minneapolis, in Friedley, and he was out hell-bent to try and beat the heck out of me, but I ended up fixing him right up with my little spin serve, and it was pretty intense. Hey, it's a championship. It's a US Nationals, and he wanted to win, and of course I wanted to win because I'd never been bothered to go over there. I only played the Worlds. I didn't bother with US Nationals too much, and but we're close friends. As a matter of fact, when we went to Las Vegas 18 months ago, was my 20th wedding anniversary with my wife, and I rang him up. I said, listen, I'm getting married in Las Vegas, and I want Elvis Presley to marry us, but I need a best man. So I conned him into coming out there and play a bit of handball and be my best man at my wedding. So, yeah, there's many other players. I mean, Paul Sweeney was a perfect example. He was again a great opponent of mine.
He's a New South Welshman.
Yeah, he was a great player, and we won many Australian titles together in four wall till he had his knees replaced, and then Joe Santilli took over, and Joe and I won 20 Australian doubles titles after that. But Paul and I won 4 or 5 on a trot before his knees caved in on him. And we're still great friends. I went to his son's wedding last week in Sydney.
Paul is the character Tangles in the story.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He used to pick up butts that were anything but just almost flat butts. He could still pick them up.
He was great on a 3-wall court and an excellent player on a 4-wall court as well. I have great respect to people that can play all codes, 1-wall, 3-wall and 4-wall. To me, hitting a ball, you should be able to hit the ball in all codes. And yet there are guys that I know were fantastic 3-wall players. I got them on a 4-wall court and they were just useless. I used to absolutely slice them to pieces. So I've got a great respect for people that can play any ball, any wall. That whoever invented that little saying is so. It really rings so true. Any wall, any ball. Let's not get into the ball because some of my opinions of the balls are just some of them. But the 1-wall ball is just hopeless, and the 40 by 20 21 is far too quick. The old guys can't even see it. I mean, it suits me nicely because luckily my right shoulder is still very good and I hit the ball pretty well, but it's just too quick. It should be a standardised ball that can be used for 1 wall, 3 wall, for the women, anybody. It's crazy that there's half a dozen balls all over the world and more, for all I know. I mean, you go to the Basque country and they play with a little baseball. But they're not going to stop playing that game. They get $1 million a year to play that game. So the game is going to have a lot of hurdles to overcome to become truly international. They're talking about it going in the Olympics. I hope it happens. But I don't see it happening in the short time. There's no way. I mean, the handball is played all over the world, but it's all different codes. And someone's got to grab hold of it and make it standardised. But the World Handball Council hasn't got enough backing from the government and all the countries either, for that matter. The perfect example is we are a handball fraternity. It's called the World Handball Council. We can't use the word handball anymore because it's been registered by that other stupid game that's called handball, with throwing a little basketball around the place. Now we have to call ourselves wall ball.
Oh,
now,
no.
if these guys see that we're calling it handball, they could sue us because the game is now registered. I'm not sure whether it's fully registered, but if you mention handball to anybody, they immediately think I'm playing that other stupid game.
They do.
So it's no longer wall. You got to distinguish it. It's got to be called wall ball or some other stupid game. But I've always known it as handball. Handball is handball. You hit the ball against the wall, not throwing it around like a little basketball. Well, unfortunately, I'm way past trying to do anything. I don't think after America, I intend to go to America by hook or by crook. And my original idea was to go to Ireland in 3 years later and finish off there where I started. But the body's saying, forget it, pal. You'll be a cripple and you don't want to do that. But cripple or not, you never know. I might still go to Ireland because a lot of people, because I was taught by the Irish Christian brothers, I swing like an Irishman, and every time I go to Ireland, they think I'm Irish. They call me Luzio over there. Luzio. Seriously, when I went in '94 to play Pat Kirby, I got to the court early and I saw an old photo of me that was probably taken in 1970. And I asked around, I said, who's that guy? And one of the guys came up and said, "Oh, great Irish champion from County Cork." I said, "What are you talking about? Have a look who he is." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what's his name?" Luzio. Now, because I won the title against Pat, that night I was sitting at one of the main tables and I told him that story. And one of the guys laughed his head off. And I said, "It's not that funny." He says, "It's going to be even funnier tomorrow because I'm the Irish Times news editor and it's going to go in the papers tomorrow." Yeah. So since then, all the old-time handballers call me Luzio.
Is there anything unique to the Stars? I mean, when I saw the championship, some of the Irish players had a big straight arm, like whack the ball like they did in Australia, and then some of them have a curly arm where they're sort of like more compact. Is there anything?
Yeah, the Irish game is, they call it the Irish whip. It's virtually a big open hand. You use your shoulders, you use your legs, you use your body, your shoulder turn. Very similar to a golf swing.
Yeah, right.
You use the whole body to hit the ball. That's why you can still hit the ball hard. Whereas the American way, because they played so much baseball in the early days, they use their wrist and elbow a lot more. And they don't get the same power as the Irish. And their arms fall off a lot quicker than the Irish guys, because the Irish is more shoulder and body, whereas the Americans use their arms a lot more.
You mean they get rotator cuff injuries?
They have a lot of elbow injuries as well. They have elbow and shoulder injuries, whereas there's no way known an Irishman will have elbow problems because it's not the elbow which gives you the power. It comes from the shoulder and the legs and the shoulder turn. The Irish whip swing is far compact and a lot a lot stronger than the American way of swinging.
Well, is there anything else before we wrap up? Any other characters? Did you ever play against that great Australian guy in Sydney? What was his name?
Paul Fallon.
Yeah, did you ever play against him?
Yes, I had great fun playing against Paul because he was a kingpin when I started playing, and he had so much experience and such a great competitor. He fixed me right up the first year or so, but I got hold of him later and chopped him to pieces big time. And,
He was older than you.
Yes, he's about 6-7 years older than me. I'd say he's early 80s, 81, 82. But again, a great competitor, a great opponent of mine, a great friend of mine now. Like as I said, him, Paul Sweeney, Jeff Walsh, all these guys that I tried to beat and tried to beat me have become my friends because we have some mutual respect and admiration for each other.
Yeah.
But talking about characters, as you probably know, there was some guy that saw me playing in 1970 and you admired the local champion and I came over and absolutely whopped your local champion.
That's right.
And
we hated Vic Di Luzio. Well, I should tell people, we were kids, 15, 14, and we thought Lou Ravisi was the greatest handball player in the world, and in comes this tough-looking guy from Victoria wearing a big V on his shirt, and we hated the Victorians, and Vic Di Luzio looked like he was like a prince on the handball court. Our guy had no chance.
Yeah, and you wouldn't believe it. This guy here decided to go to America and live in America. And would you believe he's now an American citizen?
That's me.
This disgrace,
Okay,
absolute disgrace.
This is not about me. We better wrap
Hang
up.
on, I haven't finished with you.
Oh, you're not finished?
I haven't finished with you.
This is me.
He goes to America and via Facebook he sees that I'm still playing handball, and this guy here. I go to the Nationals in Minneapolis 18 months ago, and here I am playing the final against Ed Grossenbacher, and someone introduced me to this guy, Peter Lister. And this is the same guy that knew me 40 years ago. And there he is now at my house, sleeping in my bed, eating my food.
That's right.
And he slept till 9:30 in the morning. So there he is again. Talk about characters.
Oh, it's been wonderful to meet you again, Vic. Indeed, that's a true story that I saw him in 1970, and then we finally connected up in 2016. And now I'm visiting here in Melbourne. But we'll wrap it up now. I'll put this on YouTube, and it's been great to have this reminiscence with you.
Thank you, Peter.
No worries. All right, so now we finished the tape and we might just put a little appendix on the end of it. And I was talking to Vic after we made that videotape. Vic was kind of saying how there were so many fun things that went on that honestly it would take all day to go through every championship and every detail. But is there anything we missed out on that comes to your mind that you'd like to briefly mention again?
Well, the thing that I probably didn't mention was the fact that my international handball career should have started in 1964. The very first World Handball Championship was held in New York in 1964. Now, I was chosen to represent Australia in 1964, but there was no money involved, so I scrounged some money together and I said, well, if I'm going to America to play handball, I'll go by Italy and then go to America. Unfortunately, when I got to Italy, my father and my uncle, he being a watchmaker as well, got together and snaffled me to get married in Italy.
How old were you?
I was 22 and basically went to Italy, and I was virtually put, because my father wanted me to marry an Italian girl. The nationality bit was very big with him, and all Italians were, you're virtually talking about, if you marry an Australian girl, you can't understand what they're saying because they couldn't speak English very well, that sort of stuff. the nationality stuff was still pretty fresh in those days. The Italians and Greeks were foreigners, and we were treated like that too. We were called Dagos and Wops and God knows what. Nothing like that now, thank God. But we went through school with a lot of racist slurs given to us. Anyway, that's what happened in 1964. I didn't go to America to play and represent Australia, but subsequently I did represent Australia on many occasions. Unfortunately, because I represented Australia a few times, and because Joe and I were the best players around, basically the only players around, we represented Australia, and it cost me many individual titles, because I would play in the morning for Australia, and that afternoon I'd play guys like Pat Kirby and so forth, and I had nothing left, and I lost a couple of individual titles because of representing Australia. It was an honour to represent Australia. One of the first times that I represented Australia in Ireland carrying the Australian flag, I had a tear in my eye. It was a fantastic honour to represent your own country. So I don't regret doing it, and a couple of titles is not a big deal to me. But representing Australia was very important to me, and cost me titles. That's important. That's the other thing. In 1967, when Joey Maher moved from Ireland to Canada to win the world title, we didn't go. And then in 1970, I went to Ireland, and that was my so-called start of my international career.
That was the one where you won one game out of three off, what was his name?
Pat Kirby.
Pat Kirby, right.
The other thing that happened after that, because Australia was the next country that should have been held the next world, I came back and said, look, we've got to try and hold the world. It's our turn to do it. So we had an insurance company that heard that we were going to hold the world title, so they were going to sponsor us. So it was all go. So it was going to happen. So to choose the players to represent Australia, we had a round robin thing with all the good players that came to play. And naturally enough, I was glad to hear that I thumped the shit out of all of them, so I won the singles, and then my good mate Petty Arita and I won the doubles. Now, unfortunately, when I think it was Prudential Insurance, I think it was some of their other, they finally realised that a World Handball Championships was nothing like they expected. So they went and started sponsoring cricket and dropped us like a hot brick. So we didn't hold the world title here in 72 at all. That caused a hiatus from the World Championships, because it was never held again till 84. The Irish resurrected it again in 84, and then from 84 it kept going from 84, 86, 88, 91, 94, 97, etc., until this day. It's got bigger and bigger all the time. The Irish held the world title in Dublin in 2012, and it was fabulous. There's 2,000 entries. It was the best one ever. Canada did a reasonably good job in Calgary 2 years ago. We're waiting to see what happens with America. They were supposed to hold it in Alaska, but I knew all along that it was going to be very hard to do. They wouldn't have the courts or the expertise to do it. So it's gone back to my old stamping ground in Minneapolis, and my old friend Gary Rohrer is running it. So Gary and I go back a lot of years as well. So I'm looking forward to playing again. I hope to play in Ireland in 4 years' time. I don't know whether I will. I could be in a wheelchair by then.
Right. Well, anything else that we were talking about the only other thing I thought about is that you developed for yourself innovative coaching techniques when you learned to cut the ball. You mentioned how you got a kid to stand in the back of the court and you hit the ball, and you were able to the brother who taught you how to cut didn't actually know what he was doing, right? So you made a science of it. I was thinking for the 60s, that's pretty innovative.
Well, basically, when I saw this ball move, when he hit the ball, I noticed that he was hitting across his body, and his elbow would hit his hip, and it would give extra impetus to the ball, slicing sideways. So it was not easy to start spinning the ball just by watching another guy. So I grabbed a few balls and got on the court and paid a kid some money to buy some ice creams, and I said, stand there and catch these balls, otherwise they would run down the end of the bloody the schoolyard. So I practiced hitting the ball, and this kid would throw the balls back at me, and then I learned to spin it the other way because I saw someone else moving it a couple of inches the other way, and I thought, oh, hello, so what are they doing? And I realised it was a top spin, so I practiced that for days and hours and months and so forth, and I was able to spin the ball both ways. It was all to no avail because I thought I invented it, and as I said before, you go to America and they all hop the ball. Well, not all of them, but quite a few.
The good ones.
The good players all hop the ball.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else that we were talking about before we have our last coffee and I head off?
Well, I can tell you right now, I'll probably get in bed tonight and I'll think of a million other things.
Exactly.
But
no worries.
There's so many things. I've been grateful that handball has given me a great life in sport. It hasn't been easy because my body suffered, but I have loved every minute of it, and I wish I was a little bit younger. That I can keep playing. And well, my mother used to say one thing in Italian: "Tu muori con la palluccia in mano," which translates, "You will die with a little ball in your hand." And I hope that happens. I mean, what a way to go! At 91 years old, on a handball court, having a heart attack with a handball in my hand.
All right.
One of the things I've told my wife, if I die before you, no matter what happens, in that coffin, you've got to put a handball in my hand.
I can see her. I can see her looking out of the corner of her eye over there, and
she'll probably do a lot more.
That's for real. That's going to happen.
She'll do a lot more than put a handball in my hand. I can tell you right now.
All right. Well, on that note, bye bye, everybody.
Thanks, Pete.
Bye bye, Vic.